Hi, folks. Hello, 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 hello.
One got a wasp with a buzz and I was just showing them the hot time. How you doing? Dude, I don't even know. I don't know. Except for contracts, exploding bills, surprises. Have we finally had enough?
Ipanema.
Oh my gosh. No. 85.
Hello, hello. Hi, Abby. How are you? God. Happy Friday. Indeed. Doesn't help when there's no power or internet or anything else along the way.
He won. He won. He won. He won. Oh, I'm in the camera. He's starting to record.
Yep.
Oh, what the? Oh, wait, are they recording? Uh-oh. How did that get there? Ew! Oh, what? Oh, I dropped my pencil. Oh, I dropped my trash. Oh, no. Oh. Oh, no. Oh. From where? Where did that come from? Hey! I just know how to do that. Where did this come from? This guy. This guy. Use deodorant always. I'm not eating mine for Not me. Why are you putting deodorant on your leg, bro? I just said because it helps with cancer. Okay, deodorant does not help. Is that fact? That's not a fact. Is it? Exactly. No, it's not. No, it's
Aluminum nitrate is, yeah.
Aluminum nitrate is cancer. Wait, is that actually? Oh, I didn't know that. How is that true? Only in California, though.
Well, to be fair, like most things cause cancer.
How is that drink?
Am I a
I
Sigma?
said it helped cancer.
So, look,
Oh, not the manosphere. Oh, no.
this literally all of that trash is a pointless and ultimately really, really self-defeating and unhelpful way of talking about people. There is no such thing as a class of person. There's no such thing as a...
I want to clarify that 100% making fun.
I hope so. I hope that's the case.
Yeah, nobody takes that serious anymore.
Well, there are people that take
I mean,
which is on
In our
Andrew Tate exists.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is on
Andrew Tate is
So.
here for the masculine man in the middle. I think I'm on that.
The guy's an idiot.
He is an idiot.
Like,
Dude,
very, very clearly.
The stuff
an
that he
idiot.
said, I feel like he doesn't actually mean all the stuff that he says, though, on the internet. He just says it in front of a camera because he makes
Oh,
money.
sure, it's a grift, like most things, but, you know, even still. Yeah. I got some water.
There's no way he believes half the stuff he says, bro.
It happens. It's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
as he should. Anyway, so, no was the answer to that. And also, okay. So, some more, let's learn a little bit about bossa nova. So, this is probably the most famous bossa nova song ever. You probably have heard the song before, even if you didn't know that that's what you were hearing. So it's a song called Girl from Ipanema. It's by Astrud Gilberto, who is the singer who you're about to see. But it features an American saxophone player named Stan Getz. Stan Getz was a LA-based kind of cool jazz saxophone player. He was pretty associated with kind of the stuff that Miles Davis was doing for a while. And Vince Guaraldi, if you know who Vince Guaraldi was, the guy who wrote all the Peanuts music, which is not that, not bebop, but Peanuts like the like Snoopy. So, I like the Christmas album. That's all written by Vince Guaraldi, who, who Stan Getz is very associated with Vince Guaraldi. Anyway, this is like kind of the quintessential, this is what bossa nova sounds like kind of thing. Estrela Gilberto is Brazilian, and different versions of this are sometimes sung in Portuguese, which makes sense. I think this one is in English, but you know, let's give it a listen. Gives you an idea of what this sounds like. Wow. You know this. Yeah. Stan Getz.
Back away from the camera. Get it.
Dolly. So apparently, at least early on, whenever Estrela Gilberto was singing this, she didn't actually know what she was singing. She had learned all of this phonetically. So she didn't speak English, so she was just like basically making the sounds. And if you've ever tried to sing a song in another language, you might be familiar with like, you can kind of get good at it to where you're able to reproduce the sounds, but that doesn't mean that you actually understand what you're saying. And at least early on, or apparently early on, she was just doing this phonetically, which is kind of impressive in a way. Anyway, so this song, Girl from Ipanema, was a gigantic hit, not just in the United States and in Brazil, but all over the world. It's still a really famous song and is still very kind of closely associated with Brazil, up to the point where like during the Olympics in Rio a couple of years back, in the giant, ridiculous opening ceremonies, there was an entire section where they just stopped and had like a live band version of this being played. So it's still quite popular for good or bad reasons, whatever. But and not just the song, but bossa nova in general is still a really kind of popular sound to hear in Brazil. Not as popular as samba, but like it's still a thing. You can still find bossa nova stuff all over the place. Okay, now all of this in a lot of ways is just kind of a precursor to what is nowadays far and away the most popular single style of music in Latin America. And that includes the Caribbean and South America and Central America, and lots of parts of the United States too. You hear this all the time, even here in little tiny Sellersburg. And that is reggaeton. And reggaeton is kind of its own thing. It's most closely related to dub, not to reggae, but to dub, the Jamaican kind of dance style, the dance hall kind of music. But it takes elements of lots of this stuff. There's kind of some samba stuff mixed in here. There's kind of some like banda style kind of playing sometimes that's involved with this. But reggaeton is like straight pop music. This is dollar bills, highly produced, super popular club dance music. And what's kind of funny about it is that, like all really highly produced pop music, it is very formulaic. All the pop music that we've heard, when it's like purpose-built pop music, always kind of follows a formula. Even swing musicians got tired of playing swing stuff because it was the same stuff every day. The solos had to be played the same way. It was very the same. Once you get into the 50s and you're talking about like Elvis Presley stuff, his music is super formulaic. It's really basic, verse chorus kind of thing. When you get into the 60s, even a lot of pop rock stuff, it was pretty much the same sort of formula. We haven't talked about the 70s and disco yet, but 70s era disco is like literally formulaic. Like it is the same. But reggaeton is like unbelievably similar to itself. If you've heard one reggaeton song, which you have, you're like, oh, I know exactly what this is. This is that. It's that thing. So let's hear what reggaeton sounds like. That thing.
Even as of a couple of years ago, I would be told specifically by certain club owners, don't play that. And now those are the same club owners that are booking Fedeo reggaeton parties. So it's like, well, what happened, right? Like, what changed?
Hey guys, it's Sana. I'm in New York City exploring the roots of one of the most popular musical genres today and its journey from being an expression of Afro-Caribbean identity to, well, everywhere. You definitely know the reggaeton sound. Oh, baby, when you talk like that, you make a woman go mad.
Girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me.
While those songs aren't reggaeton, they do use that very unique rhythm known as dembo. And Wayne Marshall, a music historian, can break that rhythm down.
If you've ever heard reggaeton, you've probably heard that running underneath. You could say somewhere between 3/4 to 100% of all tracks contain these actual sounds.
A really good and popular example of a reggaeton song that uses these sounds is Daddy Yankee's 2004 hit, Gasolina.
Daddy Yankee.
We are always in motion. So what are the roots of that rhythm?
Reggaeton is deeply diasporic music in a number of different ways.
All of this would not happen if it wasn't for Jamaica, like straight up. I always say passageway from Jamaica to the immigrants that had went to Panama to build a canal, which is part of my personal lineage.
Reggaeton has this history of being born out of like the way that people are playing in the clubs, like in Puerto Rico, for example, of taking hip-hop samples, hip-hop loops, dancehall loops from the original records.
The early origins of reggaeton actually go back to the emergence of dancehall reggae in the late 80s and early 90s in Jamaica. It started in literal dance halls where the selectors or DJs would mess around with the sound by using the volume knob to let in as much of the rhythm as they wanted, creating what Marshall calls a polyrhythm.
So this is Jamaican dub.
And then artists actually started building this effect into their own tracks, and it sounded like this.
So that's an example of what started to become a sort of prevailing pattern in dancehall reggae. The most influential of these tracks, of course, is Shabba Ranks' Dembow. And the original for Dembow sounds like this. You'll note that it uses the same snare drum rhythms that we just heard on Pocoman Jam.
In Panama, artists like El General started remaking dancehall reggae hits, translating them to Spanish. This became known as reggae en español. And DJ Nelson, a pioneer in reggaeton, explains why the use of Spanish by those Panamanian artists was important for him in Puerto Rico years ago.
Oh my God, these guys are singing in Spanish. I can't understand. Imagine artists from Puerto Rico singing in Spanish on a hip hop beat, dancehall beat, house beats, techno beats. It's crazy.
Okay, so back to Panama. Many of the artists making reggae and Espanol songs were the descendants of immigrants from Jamaica and the West Indies who had moved to Panama in the early 20th century to work on the Panama Canal.
And they wanted to keep in touch with their roots.
A couple generations later, they still had familial and cultural ties to Jamaica. Reggae was one of many regional musics that were part of the sort of popular mix.
It was in New York that Panamanian artists like El General actually recorded in Jamaican recording studios. And a lot of reggaeton's history and development happened here because it's here where Panamanians, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, and African Americans cross communities and sounds.
Those communities in New York's hip-hop scene were instrumental in the development of reggaeton, as Petra Rivera-Rideau, who studies race and pop culture, explains.
If you talk to early reggaeton artists, many of them list hip-hop artists in the U.S. as some of their biggest influences. In New York, Puerto Ricans settled everywhere, but among the neighborhoods where there was the largest concentration was the Bronx, the South Bronx. And this is where hip-hop originated.
And that hip-hop sound traveled from New York to San Juan. While a lot of people consider Puerto Rico to be the home of reggaeton, the question of who owns it is actually a lot more complicated because the history of reggaeton is the history of diasporas and migration.
The Noise was one of the most influential collectives to come out of Puerto Rico in the 90s.
We actually came to the Red Bull Music Festival and you can totally hear the reggaeton playing in the background, and we caught up with DJ Negro and DJ Nelson of The Noise.
Ya los casi empezábamos a venderlos dentro de la discoteca y todo el mundo en los carros con la música de la discoteca, pero eran famosos dentro de la discoteca sin sonar en la radio. Es como comienza el género del reggaetón en Puerto Rico underground.
Before The Noise became a musical collective, it was actually a club in San Juan, and it's where artists like Daddy Yankee and Evie Queen got their start.
The Noise, as a club, was founded in 1991 by DJ Negro.
Bueno, yo creo la discoteca de Noise cuando me votaron de Yo Sé Café. Ahí es donde yo digo, wow, te voy a hacer la competencia y te voy a tumbar, y ahí es donde me dedico a buscar una discoteca para entonces traer a la gente que me seguían a mí como DJ, porque en ese momento no había reggaetoneros. La gente seguía a uno por la música que uno tocaba como DJ.
At the same time, The Noise was pretty much the only place where you could listen to music that later became known as reggaeton.
That's because underground, as it was known then, wasn't really widely liked, and it was associated with criminality and obscenity.
Talking about asses, talking about guns, talking about caseríos, talking about crazy things to take the country by surprise.
La actitud hacia nosotros éramos lo peor de lo peor. Era un género que no existía. Los padres no querían que los hijos escucharan nuestra música. Y como, o sea, tú le dices a tu hijo no escuche, pero tu hijo cuando tú das la vuelta, él la va a escuchar.
This is where the parallels between hip-hop in the 90s and reggaeton in the 90s get really interesting.
The way hip-hop came from New York's projects, underground music, proto-reggaeton, was coming out of caseríos or public housing developments in San Juan.
And just like the projects in New York, or really anywhere in the United States, caseríos were associated not only with the working class, but with blackness.
And while a good part of Puerto Ricans are believed to have African and indigenous ancestry, the Afro-Puerto Rican community has a history of being stigmatized.
I mean, check this. In the 90s in particular, Black Americans were stigmatized on the mainland through associations made between their communities, the projects, drug use, increased so-called urban crime, and obscene music. And so were Afro-Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico.
It's not necessarily true that caseríos were the epicenter of criminal activity, but they developed a reputation as being a place where a lot of criminal activity, particularly around drugs, was taking place.
Between 1993 and 1996, the Puerto Rican government actually launched a campaign called Mano Duro contra el Crimen, or the Iron Fist against crime, and targeted caseríos in particular.
They used the National Guard and the Puerto Rican police to kind of occupy the caseríos as a way to curb violent crime, and it was a pretty violent occupation.
At the same time Mano Dura was happening, the government also undertook a censorship campaign.
The police came out to the stores and get the tapes, the cassettes. People listening to the reggaeton in the cars, get stopped by the police. It was crazy times.
Eso fue un momento dado que nos tomaron como que éramos lo peor, o sea, éramos lo más malo. No oigan eso porque eso te perjudica.
And then in 2002, there was another censorship campaign, and it was focused on pornography, largely targeting reggaeton music videos. But because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, the Constitution protected free speech prevailed. But that didn't stop the stigma that was associated with the music, and that in turn encouraged artists to explore their own realities more so in their music.
Popular music in Puerto Rico has been a space where people have contested a lot of these racial ideologies and pointed out racial discrimination. Tego Calderon has several songs where he directly calls out this idea of racial harmony as a myth, where he talks about institutional discrimination facing Black Puerto Ricans in an explicit kind of way.
I also want to point out that even though reggaeton has this reputation of hypersexualizing women, women singers and rappers were actually part of the scene from really early on. Take, for example, Evie Queen, who was part of the noise. And today you have women like DJ Bembona, DJ Riobamba, who are changing the reggaeton scene and image.
Like, we love perreo, but even when you throw some tracks in, you're like, ooh.
What are they playing? Oh, yeah.
Damn, maybe I shouldn't be playing this right now, but I just love to throw my ass back.
I play those tracks and I'm gonna stand in front of them and be like, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, I'm not supposed to take up this space, but like, I'm gonna reclaim that space in the club in the way that like, this was never intended to be.
And then there's also the question of the whitewashing of reggaeton.
I think a big reason that reggaeton has had this huge crossover general market moment is that it's become whitewashed. It does erase the roots of the genre, and it does erase a lot of artists that have been there since the beginning that are like equally, if not more talented and amazing, that have never had this moment.
But the history of this genre is a history of diaspora communities connected through their Afro-Caribbean heritage, trying to reclaim it.
I am Afro-Latina, I am Black, and I'm proud, I'm Panamanian, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm all these things together.
No more assimilation, none of that. Like, we have to take up the space that, you know, the generations before us weren't able to.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know what
So-
are some other pop culture mysteries that you want us to delve into.
Obviously, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of crossover things that are happening in terms of history when it comes to understanding where all this is coming from and the people who are making this coming from. But the thing that I hope that you've kind of caught on to here is that when people move from one place to another, by choice or by not, the stuff that they bring with them, their culture, their ideas, their concepts about what it means to, like, you know, be a human, come with them. And the movement of people is what has created a lot of these music types that we nowadays listen to. And kind of understanding how this music even got to be where it is, or that it even exists in the first place. Once you start pulling those questions, that's where you start needing to learn about the history, the stuff that we're talking about, like why these things exist. So reggaeton is super popular. It's a thing. You know, either you know about it or you don't. You either listen to it or you don't, and that's fine. But understanding why it's popular and where it came from is important, because there's a lot of people, not just the United States, but from around the world, who really like this kind of music. Now, they mentioned and talked a lot about hip-hop and rap, and that's obviously the next thing we're going to be learning about. That's the next big topic. And this video in particular really set up a lot of the pieces that we need to talk about where hip-hop and rap came from. And this is, in a lot of ways, probably the most important music type that we'll talk about, because it's still really, really relevant in pop culture. So much of our culture, and even the way we talk and the way that, you know, people talk about music, has been hugely influenced by rap and hip hop. And that's something that's happened mostly just in my lifetime, which is kind of interesting. And rap and hip hop are on the same kind of similar journey that lots of these other kind of pop musics that have come before it took, but it's just so new that it's sort of early stages for a lot of these things. And I'll explain what I mean by all of that as we move into the next topic of stuff. So that's where we're going to leave. That's where we're going to leave Latin America and Caribbean stuff. Reggaeton is kind of like the final form for a lot of this because it is so hugely popular, but because it is also drawing so much from all these different cultures kind of all together. Okay, so next class we're going to start in on rap and hip hop.
All right.
There'll be a lot of stuff to learn. Hopefully a lot of interesting American history that maybe you're not super familiar with.
Biggie.
Well, you know, we'll get to that eventually, but that's like 25 years before,
Slick Rick.
or 25 years after where we're going to be talking about.
Slick Rick.
Slick Rick is still really late too. See, Grandmaster Flash is the 80s. We're talking about the 70s.
So Sugar Hill Gang?
Oh, that's also way too late.
What? Really?
Oh yeah, this starts way before all that stuff. Rappers, well, we'll get there. We'll talk about Rapper's Delight and put it in the right historical context. But it's not the beginning. Okay, not even close. We probably won't get to Rage. It's not really kind of. We won't go that far into it. It is, yeah. I mean, hey, I like the rap rock thing as much as the next guy, but you know.
Already got killed in the store. No, yeah, kids, they got very. Yeah, it's the one that I. All the comments are like, not scratched. Got storm soon.